When it comes to presidential primary elections, all eyes are on Iowa and New Hampshire. But in 2020, California and Texas could attract almost as much attention. California's primary elections will now be held on March 3rd instead of in June, thanks to a bill signed into law last year by Governor Dave Bryan. And early voting in the state will be allowed to start a full month before the primary election, which is the same time as the Iowa caucus. Texas will hold its primary elections on March 3rd, and early voting, which soared to record numbers in the recent midterm election, is scheduled to start before primaries and caucuses in South Carolina and Nevada. All of this could cause candidates and their campaigns to change their early state strategies. Let's bring in Gromer Jeffers and Dave Bryan. Gromer is a political writer for the Dallas Morning News, and Dave is a political reporter for our Los Angeles station, KCBS. Always great to have you both. Dave, let me begin with you. Governor Dave Bryan signed legislation moving California's primary election up by 3 months into law last year. Since then, what has been the reaction from voters and political parties?
Well, I think, Elaine, there's a lot of interest now. Before this happened, it seemed like the primary season, particularly the early primaries, were almost carried on in another universe. Right. California seemed to be a world away. And the state primary here, the presidential primary, was so late in the season that really California had no say, virtually, over who was going to be running for president. That's all changing now. And particularly with the presidency of Donald Trump, people here are very eager now to get involved in this early primary.
So do you expect then primary turnout to increase now that the elections have been moved from June to March?
I think here in California, there's no question about it. We saw a huge turnout in the midterm elections, and I think that will continue certainly into the presidential primaries. I'd be shocked if it were otherwise.
Well, Gromer, Texas saw record early voting turnout in the recent midterm elections. What do you expect to see in 2020?
More record turnout. I mean, it's the same situation as in California. There are people excited. They were excited in the midterm elections because of Donald Trump. It was kind of a referendum on Trump. But just think if Trump is indeed on the ballot in 2020, it's going to be this midterm election on steroids. And the fact that we're talking about a March election and early voting before some of the early primary states, it's going to generate a lot of excitement, not to mention the potential of Texas candidates and California candidates, for that matter, in the primary process.
Yeah, let's follow up here. So, Dave, 2020 early voting in California will begin at the same time as the Iowa caucus, but before primaries in New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. So what impact do you think that will have on campaigns as well as voter turnout?
Well, I think it will have a significant impact here because California is a vote-by-mail state. In the midterm, midterm elections we just went through, 60% of the votes were mail-in ballots. So that will have a huge impact, I think, in this state. And also, as Gromer mentioned, there are 4 or 5, maybe even more candidates that would be running. Could be running in the Democratic primary for president. So that will generate more interest as well.
And Gromer, what does this mean for potential candidates from Texas, like former San Antonio Mayor and Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Julian Castro and Congressman Beto O'Rourke? Do they have a home field advantage?
They do, and it takes pressure off those candidates to score big wins in like Iowa or New Hampshire. You know, if they can just hold on and not get killed in those states, they know that they have Texas coming up. And let's face it, there are far many more delegates in Texas and California than Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina and Nevada. Yeah. And so I think the whole landscape of the primary contest will be changed with California moving up and Texas right there and the other primary states in March. I mean, you know, it's going to be costly because you got to spend a lot of money in these media markets. But at the same time, if you really want delegates, where are you going to go? Iowa or the primary or Texas or California. So I think it's a game changer.
Well, Dave, a similar question for you. Does California's earlier primary give candidates from this state an advantage, or could it hurt campaigns in some ways by spreading candidates too thin geographically?
Well, I think as far as candidates here in California, there will be more of them this time, in part because of the early primary, and that's already been written about in some of the news publications here in California as well. I mean, right now we're looking at Kamala Harris. Senator Kamala Harris is a possible candidate. The mayor, Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, 2 or 3 members of Congress, or perhaps Adam Schiff, and Eric Swalwell has indicated he wants to run. So the candidates are already lining up, and I think having identity here in California with all the delegates, as well as Texas, but particularly looking at the California primary, a lot of these folks are known here in California. They won't have to spend necessarily as much money as some of the out-of-state candidates will have to spend to get their names known here in a state with so many delegates.
Sounds like it's going to be a very busy early part of 2019 for all of us. Gromer Jeffers and Dave Bryan,
Yeah.
Thanks to you both. Really appreciate your insight.
You're welcome.
Thank you.